Hey YouTube, welcome back to Vintage on Vintage. Today I want to share two new cards I picked up, but I want to do it. I want to do it as a player profile because the guy I picked up, I think he's really underrated. I think he belongs in the Hall of Fame. I think he set the standard for what players of his position would eventually become 20, 30 years down the road. So I'm gonna flip this camera and tell you all about the cards and the player in just 1 second. Okay, YouTube, and the player I wanted to tell you about, the player that I think was the prototype for the position years down the road and should be considered for the Hall of Fame, is this guy right here. It is Vern Stevens. Vern Stevens, this is his 51 Bowman card. I picked this up on eBay relatively cheap. It's a beautiful card. It's got great coloring, really well centered. Corners are a little soft, but it's a 1951. But I was really excited to pick this up. So Vern was a shortstop who played from 1942 to 1955. But I will tell you, prior to coming into the big leagues, Vern had a knee injury that later in his career came back to plague him. That knee injury, first of all, kept him from being able to go into the military. So he did play in the early 40s when a lot of players were in the military. And then towards the end of his career, that knee issue, he re-injured that knee. And between the knee and the fact that his eyesight was starting to wane a little, he really didn't do much beyond 30 years of age. So he had a really short career, a 10-year run, but his 10-year run from 1942 to 1951 was as good a 10-year run as there's ever been by a shortstop, in my opinion. He had a great run. So he broke in, like I said, in 1942. His rookie year, he hit 14 home runs, drove in 92 RBIs, and he hit 294 as a rookie. Finished fourth in the MVP voting. So some pretty amazing stuff there. And then from in 1943, 44, and 45, he followed that up with 22 homers, 20 homers, 24 homers, 91, 109, and 89 ribbies. So you can see he was the first really consistent power hitting shortstop in baseball. And in 1945, he actually became the first shortstop to lead the American League in home runs. Kind of a fun story about Vern. At one point, he was trying to get a better contract from the Browns. He was making $13,000. He wanted $17,500. The Browns weren't budging. So he went to the Rebel Mexican League and he signed a 5-year, $175,000 contract. And the commissioner was going to ban all players that went to the Mexican League for a minimum of 5 years, and Vern's dad talked him out of it. So ultimately he came back, got the raise from the Browns, and ended up staying in the major leagues. But it was just kind of a funny side story. So before I tell you more about Vern, let me show you the other card I picked up. And this is the 52 Bowman. And I got this in a PSA 4. This is just a beautiful card. Look at the coloring on that card. Centering's really strong. Love this card. I was really excited to pick it up. These two cards, when I did my research on Vern, these were the two cards that I thought were his best looking cards, but he does have quite a few others that are pretty nice. And I will tell you, I think I'm going to add more Vern Stevens to my collection just based after my research on him. So, after those 3 straight years, he had an injury-plagued 46, came back with a pretty good year in 47. The Browns, quite honestly, were a struggling franchise, and they were looking to sell some of their assets. And they had already turned down some offers. So at one point, Boston had offered Johnny Pesky straight up for Vern. And the manager of the Browns said no. Vern was every bit as good a shortstop in his opinion and a way better hitter. Excuse me. Sorry about that. I'm still fighting a bit of a cold. So then I will also tell you that Bill Veeck at one point was going to trade Lou Bordeaux straight up for Vern. And but the fans in Cleveland found out about it, and they started to make a ruckus, and they backed out of that deal. Although I will tell you that I think Vern had a better career than Lou Boudreau when you look at it all in all. So, like I said, though, the Browns were struggling, and in '47 they decided to get rid of some of their assets, and their best asset, of course, was this guy. So they ultimately traded Vern and another player to the Red Sox for 6 players and like $375,000 in cash. So it was a big deal. You know, the Red Sox already had Johnny Pesky at the time as their shortstop. So there was come spring training, there was kind of a competition. But at the end, the manager put Vern at shortstop. And you would have thought he might have put Vern at third because Vern had the stronger arm. But I think what people didn't realize about Vern Stevens, he was a good defensive player. He didn't have the range some of his contemporaries had, but he had a much stronger arm. He was very quick. He could play deeper, take angles. He was sure-handed. You know, he led the American League in putouts 3 times while he was with Boston. So Vern was a solid defensive player. I don't think he gets enough credit for that. And then when it comes to offense, he was just hands down the best offensive shortstop of his era. So it didn't take the Red Sox long to figure out that Vern was the guy to hit cleanup behind Ted Williams and in front of Bobby Doerr. So that was a pretty killer lineup. And Vern responded in his first year by hitting 29 home runs, driving 137 RBIs and hitting 269. And the 269 average, although a little low, he was hampered with injuries towards the end of the season, and his average kind of tailed off. But he still drove in 137 RBIs. And then he followed that up the next year. He became the first shortstop to ever hit 30 home runs in a season. He hit 39 home runs. He drove in 159 runs, and he hit 290. So those 159 RBIs to this day are still the most RBIs by a shortstop in a season. So think about the players that have come after Vern: Ernie Banks, Cal Ripken, A-Rod, Tejada, Nomar. None of those guys have driven in more runs in a season than Vern. As a matter of fact, when it comes to RBIs in a season by a shortstop, Vern Stevens has the number 1 season, the number 3 season, and the number 6 season of all time. So 3 of the top 6 RBI seasons from that position belong to this guy right here, Vern Stevens. After the 159 RBI season, he had a 30 home run, 144 RBI season, and he hit 295. So in 3 years, in a 3-year span, Vern Stevens drove in 400 and, let me look at my math here, 440 RBIs. That's 9th all-time in baseball. And of all the players, and it's the most, by the way, since from the war through the steroid era by any player. And all of the other players in the top list, the top 10 or 15 list that have accomplished over 430 RBIs in a 3-year span, all of them, with the exception of one, Sammy Sosa, and I think you understand why Sammy's not in, all the other players are already in the Hall of Fame. So he had a fantastic run there, and then this following year, he got hurt. The injury started to pile up. He had 15 homers and 78 ribbies, and then his career sort of diminished from that point on. And he was, but during that 10-year span, excuse me again, he led all of baseball in RBIs. As a matter of fact, statistically, he was probably the second most productive offensive player to Stan Musial. And when you look at him against his peer sets, the shortstops, he was number 1 in hits, and that included, Lou Boudreau, Phil Rizzuto, Johnny Pesky, Pee Wee Reese. He was number 1 in HRs. He had 224 in that period. Next closest shortstop had 97. He was number 1 in runs scored at a shortstop position. He was number 1 in RBIs. Next closest only had 611. His 162 game average in his career was 94 runs, 23 homers, 111 RBIs, and a 286 batting average. So, here's some other things. He was an 8-time All-Star. So he was 8 times he was an All-Star, 6 times he was top 10 in the MVP voting. He led the American League in HRs, like I said, in 1945. He led the league in RBIs 3 times. He had 100 RBIs 4 times in his career, 90 RBIs 6 times in his career. He was just, quite honestly, hands down the most dominant offensive shortstop of his time. And defensively, he wasn't that far off his peers. So, yet he's not in the Hall of Fame. So what happened, unfortunately, he died young of a heart attack, and the baseball writers kind of forgot about him. I don't know if it was that he played a few years while other people were doing military service. I don't know if it was because of the Mexican League or that he didn't really hang out with the writers, but for whatever reason, they lost support, and there was nobody there to kind of get him into the Hall of Fame, and he was forgotten, and he didn't get a vote when he first came eligible, not one. He didn't get anything from the Veterans Committee, and I just think that is a shame, because I think, when some of his peers would tell you he belongs there, right? Bobby Doerr said Vernie was definitely a Hall of Fame caliber player. When you look at his stats, they're better, equal to or better than any of his peers. Bob Lemon said, I consider Vern one of the toughest batters I had to face. For me, it was a toss-up between him and Ted Williams on who I'd rather face in that lineup. So this is a guy that, even though it was a short career, there are players like a Koufax, like a Jackie Robinson, like a Ralph Kiner, who have very short Hall of Fame resumes that are in there. And I think this guy is one that should be in there also. So anyway, I'd love to hear your opinion of it. I appreciate you letting me take the time to share my cards, tell you a little bit about Vern Stevens. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, keep collecting, and we will talk soon.